What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by a veteran MMA media member, Ian O'Neill. Is that the first time you've called veteran?
I've gone to veteran status now in my fifth year. My goodness.
You've been doing it long enough now. But I've thank you very much, Ian, for joining me. But I've Ian on today to talk about the UFC, because I usually, and myself and Ian actually have a podcast called The Chase It Back, where we talk about everything not UFC. So we very rarely talk about the UFC together. And obviously here on Sherdog, a lot of what I talk about is, One Championship, PFL, Bellator, and all of that. But I want to talk about the UFC. And what I want to do here with Ian today is talk about the next 3 UFC pay-per-views. So 302, which is now Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier. Then we have the return of Conor McGregor, 303, and then the big Manchester card at 304. But also, to kick us off here, Ian, I was doing a podcast the other day, and someone basically asked me about the kind of, and maybe they didn't ask me, but I came up with this myself, but I like to think they asked me, about like the new cyclical nature of mixed martial arts. And I feel, so years and years ago, we had there was 7 or 8 events a year or whatever, and that was a cycle that can explain itself. And then we had, a few more events, and then the pay-per-view with the odd fight night, and now we have, basically pay-per-view, 3 fight nights, pay-per-view, 3 fight nights, pay-per-view, 3 fight nights, with the odd exception. But I feel like over the last maybe year or so, we have, the new cycle is like almost bi-monthly or 2 monthly or 3 monthly cycles, let's put it that way. So we've 2 good pay-per-views in a row, and then we maybe have an off month, and then we have another 3 good pay-per-views in a row, and then maybe we have an off month or 2 off months. And I feel like that's what we have here. So we had the Brazilian card, which was kind of the off month, and then we had the 3 great cards before that, 299 and 300 obviously were absolutely unbelievable. And I feel like we've had our off month now. The fight night cards in the middle are very much like almost nothing cards for a lot of people. You might tune in for the odd fight or the main event or whatever, and now we're back into the cycle of, I'm really looking forward from as we record this on at the end of May to the 304 card that's coming up on the 27th of July. So we have basically the next 3 months of fights already set here that we already have to look forward to. And my question for you here, Ian, before we get into maybe the cards themselves and have a look at them, maybe even a bit of a technical look, but an anticipation look more than anything else, is this the way we kind of solve that problem of the cards not getting enough love because there are so many cards? So it feels like we used to always say, how can we break down this card, because we just had a card on Saturday. It's already Wednesday. The weigh-ins are coming up in the day after tomorrow, and we haven't even had time to build it. Is this, and I wonder, first of all, do you feel this new cycle that I kind of feel? And also, is this kind of a savior for us to appreciate MMA and the big MMA fights in a new way?
I think you're right, and you have definitely some value to what you're saying there. Look, when it comes to combat sports, anticipation is a huge part of it, and allowing yourself to get excited for these big fights as well. And, from my perspective, it's pretty similar to what your perspective was as well, Shawnee, is that we watched it where, we didn't have as many cards in a month as we would have now. And I think the cycle that we're in right now came with a transition that we had to kind of get used to. And I think maybe we are kind of getting into that stage where we're getting used to. I think that it kind of goes hand in hand with the business structure of the UFC currently, in what they want to do with their cards as well. We've got our Apex shows, we've got our certain road shows that happen as well, and now we've got our stacked pay-per-view cards. And what we are seeing, and definitely what we did see at the start of this year, was absolutely ridiculously stacked pay-per-view cards, especially 299 and 300. I mean, the one 298 in Toronto was pretty good. It had some good fights on it as well. I mean, this next one coming up, 302, with Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier, is pretty good as well. Do those ones have the name value? And along with the Brazilian card, not that much, but if we know that we're getting some monster cards along the way, you can provide a little bit of forgiveness of the turn of schedule. And I think when the UFC are putting these cards together, we're definitely seeing a trend with these pay-per-view cards where there is a higher level of anticipation, and that build-up does exist a little bit more than maybe it has. So maybe a little bit before the pandemic and during the pandemic too. And I think the pandemic and what happened during the pandemic did have an effect maybe on the strength of schedule of certain UFC cards as well. But I definitely agree with what you're saying, is that I do feel these level of anticipations for the pay-per-view cards. No matter what, look, we're always looking for that certain level of jeopardy, and it's certainly what we get, whether it's the name value or non-name value, whether it's absolutely stacked to the rafters, or maybe one or two fights here and there. We always tend to get some level of jeopardy, whether it's a title fight, whether it's maybe a number one contender fight, or maybe it's a young up and comer that's coming to fight a veteran, and we're looking to see roles reversed in certain divisions in the UFC. But look, it's always going to be hard to kind of beat cards like 299 and 300, and you're always going to have, for lack of a better term, a certain hangover from those cards as well. And the strength of schedule is based off of what fighters are ready at particular times. But I think the UFC have kind of set that trend that, we have our fight night cards, we have our Apex cards, and we have our pay-per-view cards. And, the pay-per-view cards are the ones that you should be most highly anticipated, and most looking forward to watching as well.
I think a very interesting point I just want to pick up on that you made there is about kind of the matchmaking during the pandemic. And I wonder if it has changed back to where it was not just before the pandemic, but a good few years before that. And this is the way I would kind of explain it, and maybe it actually explains the new kind of cycle that I'm feeling here. And whether I'm right or wrong, but it feels like this way to me. You can tell me even if it feels that way to you, or maybe the people listening if they want to leave it in the comment section. So during the pandemic, it felt like we were getting fights announced and they were happening next week, because like we didn't know what was happening and all that. And just prior to the pandemic, it felt like we were getting fights announced, and every fight that was announced was like December, It was like, that fight is 9 months away, and like, oh my God. And you'd always have the Capoza tweet, going, I'll believe this fight when it happens, when they get into the, and maybe because we had like the Tony Ferguson Habib thing happening so many times, that really hurt us. But then in the pandemic kind of changed that. And I actually think we've gotten back to like, let's go with the pre-Habib Tony stuff, where the fights are announced and it's like, oh, that fight's in 2 months, or like that fight's just coming up. And it's funny because with the Manchester card, even though it is let's say from when it was announced, it was like 3 months away, where we have like, oh well, Conor's fighting before that, and then we have the Makhachev Poirier fight. So like they're kind of all, we almost group them together, as I said, with the kind of cycle, and then they don't feel as far away, and I feel like they're actually going to happen. I feel like they're only around the corner, and that is way better than like. But and the point of that, and why that is good, and why the previous way of announcing them like fucking 7 months before it is bad, is by the time they come around, it feels like, oh, that's happening now. All right, okay. I've thought about that.
After burning yourself out with excitement at that stage.
Yeah, I thought about that months and months ago. So it is. And I think it's kind of keeping MMA more fresh, and it is, as I said, that like. You're dead right in terms of like the fights like, Lerone Murphy and Barboza, they mean something, and there's always one or two meaningful fights in these fight night events, but there's like a clear distinction than there ever has been before between the fight night events and the pay-per-view events, and never mind the Apex events, which are probably another distinction between them. But I just before we get into the cards as well, one last thing I want to ask you. Do you feel, as it feels like there's a lot of people out there that are absolutely like just distraught with these Apex events and are absolutely sick of them. Like for me, I don't really feel it, and maybe it's a little bit because, and I know you do as well, so that's why I'm kind of asking you the questions. I cover obviously a lot of the PFL and Bellator, and as you cover even more than me in terms of the local events and all of that, and the amateur events in Ireland as well as the early pro events coming up. I wonder, is it just the people who watch all of the UFC are completely browned off with that, or are you too? Like, are you hating on these Apex events? Or like, I hate on them a little bit, but not nearly as much as most people. Where do you stand on them?
Yeah, hate is a very, very strong word. I think more so the word I would look at is sometimes you're a little bit burned out where you are watching, you know, look at with all due respect, some maybe not high quality fights that would happen on the UFC Apex. I think there's accumulation of that, but there's also the accumulation of the cycle of the roster within the UFC. And I think over the last couple of years, and I've been lucky enough to see in a couple of cycles, the same as yourself, with up and coming talent who turn into stars and turn into champions. And I think we had that over the last 2 or 3 years. But if I can honestly say with fight night cards and even with some Apex cards, I do recognize a hell of a lot more names than I would have maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, and I'm getting a little bit more familiar as well. I do quite enjoy a UFC event with a live audience. I personally, I know you have spoken about maybe not feeling too strongly about it, and I wouldn't say that I feel too strongly about it. I loved the Apex cards when they first came out, but I think
Yes.
the novelty wore off after a while. And looking at that UFC St. Louis card, I truly felt that I enjoyed that card. I enjoyed watching it. I enjoyed hearing the buzz of the crowd. I enjoyed hearing the excitement of the crowd, and I don't think it would have had the same impact in the UFC Apex with that lesser crowd. So that to me tells me something. That's my viewing experience. But what my viewing experience might not be what your viewing experience is, or what other persons like. People like what they're going to like. So I think there's accumulation of a lot of those things and more of an acceptance on what the schedule is going to be now, which has come with a big transition since Endeavor have taken over the UFC and what they want to produce as a product. And I think, time brings a little bit of healing when you're looking at those cards, and maybe the frustration goes like, if we don't want to look at those cards, well, we have to look at those cards, but we can choose when we look at those cards. Do we want to go through the 6 to 8 hour slog on a Saturday for a UFC Apex? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I put myself through it. Sometimes I regret it. But more than one occasion that I have had other things on where I've decided, I go radio silent. I watch it the next day, I take it in, and I enjoy doing that as well. So I guess, there's something there for everybody, but it's up to you what you want to do. So it's the age old thing. Like, if you don't want to watch it, or if you're going to be up in arms and complaining about it, well, just don't watch it then. It's still going
It's
to be
hard
going on.
though.
You
It's
can go
hard.
back and check your yeah,
Yeah, it's true.
so I mean, I don't know what it is. Am I right or wrong in saying that? I don't
No,
know.
no, you are right, but like, it's different for us, obviously. But it's sometimes it's tough not to watch it because, like, I
And
do
when I
think,
say what I'm saying, I'm meaning just with the general audience.
yeah,
Us as media members, it's our obligation to watch these cards. So
100%.
yeah, that's kind of what I meant for a bit of clarity.
I think it's weird as well. Just last point on this because you were right in saying though when it started during the pandemic, I really loved it. The quietness, you could hear the shots better, and that did get a bit old quick. But I feel like for people like myself and you who watched, I think soccer was probably the worst sport you could watch with no audience. It's
Oh,
terrible. Like, fighting is still fighting. Like, fighting like I used to actually enjoy the tough fights when tough was a thing, where there was no commentary, no nothing on them. Like, it's like you don't need someone
well,
to
it's
tell you
hearing
the story of a
the
fight.
impact of the strikes, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's something that I quite enjoyed, and it brought me back to the old tough days. Is like hearing the impact of the strikes, and you feel. I think when there was no crowd there at the early Apex days, you felt more connected with the fights
You
because
did.
you're in there and you're
Yeah.
hearing the punches and the kicks, and you're like, oh my god, and you kind of that gets a little bit taken away when the crowd is there and you hear the Ric Flair boos and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
but the
Can kind of
fight,
take away from.
I've always maintained the fight tells you the story itself. Like, a soccer match doesn't always. Sometimes you need the crowd in soccer is so important because, like, when there's like a hard tackle or something, it's like, oh yeah, and then when like a comeback starts, when that happened without the crowds, it just, there was no atmosphere. There was no what's that, momentum. There was no momentum. Just did not exist, and it's very different than MMA because you can't ignore it. It's real. It's in front of you. But anyway, that could be another podcast for another day. Let's talk about UFC 302. I was doing a Q&A the other day, and someone threw out at me that UFC 302 was a poor card. And we'll talk about the main event in a second. But the undercard, Ian, what do you think? Like, do you think this is a good pay-per-view card or a bad pay-per-view card? I'll give you my answer afterwards. What do you think?
I think it's an average pay-per-view card. I don't think you could label it poor. I mean, we said we talk about the main event in a few minutes, but I have to say you can't call a pay-per-view card with the number one pound per pound fighter fighting on it a poor pay-per-view card. I think getting the chance to see a guy like Islam Makhachev in action is worth value for money for me at least. And obviously Dustin Poirier getting that opportunity. You got a top of the rankings middleweight clash there between Sean Strickland, Paulo Costa. Very interesting stylistic matchup as well. Kevin Holland against Michael Olajenchuk. I mean, that was a weird late addition to the card, but I mean, look, you're going to see an exciting fight when Kevin Holland is there. We got Jailton Almeida versus Alexander Romanov. Obviously, Jailton Almeida coming off a loss, and he has a lot of questions to answer coming in here as well, and a big point to prove that he's still a player in the heavyweight division. So, we have to be careful when we're judging these cards not to judge each pay-per-view based off what they are, because if we're looking at this pay-per-view and trying to judge it off a UFC 300 card or UFC 299 card, it probably is a poor card in comparison, but we can't fall into it. It's pretty similar to what we got in the Brazil card, really, in 301, and that was a quite entertaining card from top to tail.
I think it's a tad bit better than that, but you know what it is? It's one of those ones that, like, you almost have to study it a bit to realize how good it is. It isn't one that pops off in you. Like Grant Dawson, Joe Selecki, that's a very good fight, but not everyone might remember Joe Selecki's fight or something like the Randy Brown Selecki dos Santos fight. That's a good fight, but from two guys who are probably not going to reach a certain level. You could say the same about Holland and Oleksiejczuk. And look, I don't think I think Strickland and Costa, people can, that people know about that one. But like even Basil Hafez, Mickey Gall, that's a good fight. Morona, Price. I think there are a lot of good. There's no great contender fight on it apart from the top two fights. But I actually think it's a good card. Let's talk about the main event, because we'll be here all day if we go through all these. I'm going to be a bit negative a second, right? So we've been very positive, I feel like, so far on this podcast. Coming into UFC 300, right? And this you'll get this comparison. Everyone was really excited about Bobby Green versus Jim Miller. And they were like, oh, Jim Miller, 100, 200, 300. He's got to go in here. He's got to get... And I was like, this is a terrible fight for Jim Miller. Like, Bobby Green just an awful matchup for him, and he ended up like beating him down pretty badly. Everyone's really excited for Dustin Poirier coming in here. Brilliant opportunities, another title shot. Is he going to get beaten down badly here, Ian?
There is a very, very good chance that will happen, because I've been guilty of it before in the past. And a lot of people can get guilty of it heading into this fight, that we get caught up in the fairy tale. But we don't see too many fairy tales in mixed martial arts, unfortunately. And, we really have to look at this fight with our heads as opposed to looking at it with our hearts. We would all be over the moon happy if Dustin Poirier had somehow managed to pull it off. But, the facts are the facts. And Benoit Saint-Denis put it up to Dustin Poirier before Dustin Poirier got the job done. Obviously, he's coming off a very heavy knockout loss as well to Justin Gaethje, the fight before that. And we're looking at Islam Makhachev, who's coming into his prime and performing at peak levels here. And those are the facts that I'm looking at coming into this. And when you put all of them in the line, that doesn't bode too well for Dustin Poirier's chances coming in here to get his hand raised. Now, mixed martial arts is mixed martial arts. Anything can happen at any time. You could catch him, but I'm a big believer that Islam Makhachev is going to pour it on him here and get a finish inside 2 rounds. I would say, to be honest, I'd say he'll even beat him up on the feet if Dustin chooses to try and take him down. He's obviously going to dominate the grappling exchanges as well. So, I'm looking at this fight, like I said, more so as an opportunity to look at the number one pound for pound fighter in the world right now in Islam, and seeing, if he has managed to level up even more. And that's what's exciting me about this fight more so. A lot of people maybe might be getting more excited about the fact that Dustin Poirier might come in and might get this done. It's not really like that for me, Shawnee.
Yeah. The more I think about it, I'm that way too, but look, it's MMA, and you never know. 303, look, we have a few minutes to talk about this card. It probably needs a few hours to talk about this card. Before we get to the main event again, the undercard again, I'd say it was similar to 302. We've Jamal Hill. As far as I'm aware, his opponent isn't announced yet. Khalil Roundtree, obviously the drug suspension out for 2 months. Feely Swanson, good enough fight. We've after that, maybe not a whole lot. I think Makhachev Barrialt against Joe Pyfers is a pretty fun one. Peyton Talbot against Yanis Kimura. I think Peyton Talbot is probably the best young up and comer in the sport right now, and so we have that, and then Ricky Simon and a few others. So not a bad undercard, not a great undercard. If a lot, I think, will tell about the Jamal Hill opponent as well, who that will be. But McGregor Chandler, let's just make maybe a couple of quick points about this, because there's so many points to be made. First of all, right, I'm sitting here in Ireland, and the Irish coverage for this, I'm very intrigued by what it'll be like. I put out a tweet there the other day. I was listening to a podcast on one of the top let's say radio broadcasters, YouTube broadcasters in Ireland, and McGregor came up, and his name came up because he wasn't at the Anthony Joshua fight, right? And they referred to him as like that fella. They were like, was that fella not there? And they were like, no, he wasn't there. That guy was. And they literally refused to say his name. And I know people, I put this tweet up and people are replying to me, oh, well, that's because of allegations and that's because of his dog whistles about right-wing politics and all of this. And I'm like, I'm not saying any of that stuff isn't relevant or a reason to not like a guy or the reason to whatever. But it's I'm sure that is part of the part of the hatred for McGregor and the part of the lack of coverage from MMA. But my point here is that there is a lack of coverage from MMA. What the reasons for it are, we know the reasons for it are McGregor, right? The reasons for it is McGregor and the uptake MMA had with him and the way he acted and all of that, right? But the fact of the matter is that the coverage of mixed martial arts in Ireland right now, apart from, obviously myself and a few other people covering the sport in Ireland as well, is nil, is virtually nil. You'll have the odd thing, the odd time, but and I'm not just for McGregor. You could understand that narrowly, although there probably will be a bit about McGregor because they know it'll bring clicks. But the likes of Ian Gary, the likes of Caelan Lockyer and others, they're not getting covered. When the whole Ian Gary thing happened about coming back to Ireland, everyone's talking about it. I was on John Anik's podcast and he said to me, I'm like, he's going to struggle to get on this place and this place and this place because they refuse. It's like they can't talk about MMA. It's like persona non grata. The sport, not just McGregor. No, McGregor, but also the sport because of McGregor. And I feel fair enough if you want to keep McGregor out of it, but the sport, I think a little bit unfair. But having said that, right, back to McGregor, I don't think there's going to be a vast amount of coverage. I don't think he's going to be sitting on the Late Late Show doing it. Now, there might be one or two things that force a bit of coverage in Ireland, and we might be hearing about them pretty soon. But I think in general, that's one big point coming into this. The point I want to ask you about, Ian, is where do you think McGregor is? Like, do you think... Like, I can't ignore the fact that one of my bets at the start of the year was Michael Chandler to win against Conor McGregor. That was one of my bets for the year. I find it very hard to see McGregor getting back to a level. Chandler's now been out for a long time as well, though. McGregor's come back. He seems to be training pretty hard. A few weeks out from the fighting, what is your sense of it? Like, will McGregor be ready? What percentage of the best McGregor will he look? What's your take on it?
It's very, very hard to call, and I would even go maybe as far as to say as Conor McGregor doesn't know where he's at right now. And I don't think he's going to be able to find out until that cage door closes at 303 and he actually gets in there into some live action against Michael Chandler. Now, what gives me a little bit of promise is that, he seems to be taking this camp seriously, obviously out with interviews saying that, he's been off the booze and the partying and all of that. And he was, coming off a couple of camps as well in preparation of maybe possible fights that were happening earlier than the scheduled one here. So, I remember speaking with you a long time ago when this fight was announced and what we wanted for Conor McGregor, and both of us were in agreement in saying, what you want to see from a fighter in Conor's situation is you almost have to be getting yourself into a pre-camp for the fight camp, and then, you know, continuing that level onto upcoming fights as well. Now, there was a little bit of a blip when you are as big as a guy and as busy as a guy as Conor McGregor with other business. He has the Forged Stout, he has the whiskey, he had the movie. You cannot be fully committed to that pre-camp. So I don't know whether he's got that pre-camp, but he's certainly gone in for a solid 10, 11 week fight camp. And that gives me a little bit more promise, to be honest, than I would have had maybe 2 months ago. He seems to be in a decent headspace. He seems to be focused. He doesn't seem to be, you know, super aggressive as of yet. Maybe that'll change closer to the fight. But me thinking if Conor is going to win, I would have more confidence in him doing it right now than I would have 2 months ago. And I'll have to kind of deter my expectations until I see press conferences, how he looks, how he reacts. And I think, you know, I won't be able to give you a solid answer to that question maybe until probably I see him 2.5 minutes into that fight with Michael Chandler, if I'm being completely honest.
That's very fair. The one thing I would say, I've heard from 3 separate people, and all 3 have kind of said he's trying his best. You know, all 3 have said he's preparing as hard as he could. And I know you talk about mini camps. He had like the Chandler tough camp, if you want to put it like that. Then at the start of the year, remember, like I think he went like 6 weeks, and he had like he had the date and all,
in Dubai or somewhere like that.
And then it kind of, you know, he said it, and this is him saying it himself. He kind of like, well, they wouldn't actually announce the date, so he kind of fell off the wagon a bit. And then, as you said, the film premiere and all that came up. But as you said, like 11
one last thing, Shawnee, is like we also have to take into account how devastating of an injury that he's coming back from as well.
Yes.
And how he's going to react to that injury. Is he able to take damage to that leg? If Michael Chandler comes out and starts calf kicking that leg, or if he starts throwing kicks and hits an elbow, how is that leg going to react? And I think that's going to be a big, big factor in how the level of performance that we're going to get from Conor. Like, he may be there mentally, but is he there physically? And, you know, he's coming towards the end of his career and taking a hell of a lot of trauma in the fight game. And it's going to be very interesting to see. I think it would be good for everybody if you know, obviously for Conor, for mixed martial arts, and for Irish mixed martial arts, if he was to go out there and complete the comeback and then be able to maintain that. But, you know, we've seen time and time again, it's not easy to do that at the later stages of your career.
It's not. And it's funny you should say, like, it feels like a lot of time with vicious leg breaks like that, it is more mental than physical. Because like the physical, it heals. But I think you're right with McGregor, because he's so good mentally. Like, you look at someone like Chris Weidman, it just does. It looks a bit mental, but it looks physical as well. Like, it's you're dead right to question that, but not query. I think more than question. I think because like it's bound to be something that needs answer, but. Oh, I can't wait for that. 304 then. I think 304 is the best of this trio of cards. Obviously, we have the welterweight title. We have the silver medal in the heavyweight division in the co-main event. The Tom Aspinall fans will be out for me. Anyway, but we've Makhachev. Cape. That fight won't happen, but I can't look.
I'm sick of getting excited to see Manuel Cape fight. I went as far as to say that I believe that he would be the flyweight champion by the end of the year this year, but the man can't even tip the scales at 125, let alone win a championship. So I'm not going to be looking forward to that fight until I see him inside the cage with Makhachev.
100%. Like, I want to talk about Paddy Pimblett and Bobby Green more in a second, but Aaron Lallin, Chikadze as well, great fight in the featherweight division. Daniel Pineda against Nathaniel Wood, love that fight. Bruna Bazil, big step up for her against Molly McCann. And then we've obviously the Irish as well. Sean Bannon is on this card, and it's this card. Kellen Loughran's on it. It is, isn't it? You reported that fight as well. So, and then Oban Elliott as well, and Mick Parkin. Okay, we were a little bit biased because obviously we were covering the sport in Ireland and a lot of the UK fighters as well, but geez, from top to bottom, I care about every fight in this card, obviously with that little bit of geographical bias on it. Really love it. Right. First of all, the Paddy Pimblett, Bobby Green. Is this fight Bobby Green versus Jim Miller Part 2? Is this like, oh, I'm really excited for that fight, and Bobby Green is going to dismantle him? Is that going to happen?
Dismantle him? a dismantling could happen, but I'm not sure if it is going to happen. When I'm looking at this fight and in previous trends with Paddy Pimblett's fights as well, obviously he might not have performed to the level of expectation against Tony Ferguson. I almost had him finish, but didn't get the finish. I think that Bobby Green is much more elusive on the feet, so he's not going to be as easy to hit as Tony Ferguson, and also has stellar takedown defense. So you know. You're taking away a strong attribute from Paddy, and being able to take a fight down and dominate, which ultimately won him the fight, or what made him win it comfortably against Tony Ferguson. But this is what we've been waiting for Paddy Pimblett. I think with Tony Ferguson, obviously Tony was at the latter stages of his career, and we felt Paddy had enough to get it done. But this is the one that has the big question mark over it, and this is the one that we've been waiting for quite some time to see if Paddy can get up to that level, because Bobby Green is in his 40s, or turning 40 soon, I believe, or if he's not 40 already, he's a 55 veteran. I mean, this is the ultimate test and the biggest test, in my opinion, of Paddy Pimblett's career. And I wouldn't be confident that he would get the job done, but at the same time, there are ways that he can get the job done, if you know what I'm saying. And I think that adds to a level of intrigue on this fight. When Paddy is fighting, these two boys are going to be yapping at one another. They're going to create a bit of hype around this. The UK crowd is going to get behind Paddy, but at the end of the day, fights at this level, they're not going to be getting any easier for Paddy Pimblett. And this is kind of the start of, the boomer bust phase for Paddy Pimblett, I would say.
100%. Like, there's this weird thing about Paddy is he almost has two different set of analytics with him. For the people who I think have only been watching him since he signed for the UFC, and then people who've been covering him since the Cage Warriors days and all. And, I would throw the two of us into that. And I feel for people like us, a lot of the talk has been like, well, when Paddy meets a high-level striker, he's going to struggle badly. Now, that's never happened yet. This is arguably for a high level is a Bobby Green high level. He's a good level. Paddy has only lost so far to good, people who have wrestled him in Nad Naramani and Sarnbach at this level, right? So if this happens and Paddy loses on the feet, it'll be the first time that's happened. And I hate the word exposed, but if that part of his game is shown to be the weak link that a lot of people think it is, it's going to be very tough to bring Paddy along to a championship level going forward. So let's see.
I think Paddy is getting hurt an awful lot as well. He's been hurt in previous fights. He said he was not 100%. I think he had an injury going into the Tony Ferguson fight. So, Paddy has been fighting since he was 15, 16 years of age professionally, so the game is catching up on him a little bit as well. And when you're coming into that upper echelon of the UFC lightweight division, there ain't no easy fights there, as I said. And
when you've 24 fights and you've spent like years out injured, like that's a lot of wear and tear on the body. You're 100% correct. Let's touch on the two top fights before we go in. I'm so glad this Aspinall Blades fight is happening. I know people think different things of interim titles, but when John Jones is out injured for 15 months and you make an interim title 2 weeks after he gets injured, that interim title has to be defended. And the fact that it's only been defended months and months later, and I know Aspinall was kind of injured too, so maybe they needed a bronze title in here, I don't know. But it's finally been defended. Thank the Lord. It's going to be another 6 or 7 months before John Jones fights. I know the Stipe Miocic thing makes it all a little bit murky, but we have the fight, and I'm so happy we have the fight. Maybe we'll just move on from that, because I think that's just the way it is. Bilal and Edwards. This is the fight again. This is one of these fights this is the fight that had to be made. How do you see this fight going? We haven't got into much, a lot of analytics in any of these fights, and we will obviously do that closer to the time. But I think this is a very intriguing fight. Obviously, we saw a few minutes between them until there was that no contest. How do you see this one going between Bilal and Leon?
Unfortunately, I see it going very boringly, to be honest.
I don't think you're the only one saying that. I don't think you're the only one saying it.
Yeah, and it's like I was live at Leon's last fight with Colby Covington down in Vegas, and it wasn't really an exciting fight either. And if you're looking to try and put somebody in there to try and make it exciting, I don't think Bilal Muhammad is the guy, with all due respect to Bilal. His style is effective, but it's not exciting. And how can I see him getting it done? Well, is he going to be able to go in and take Leon Edwards down at will? Well, Kamaru Usman wasn't able to do it. I know Colby Covington had somewhat level of success, and maybe at the later stages. Is he going to be slick enough on the feet to catch Leon Edwards? I don't think so. I think his boxing is decent enough, but overall, kickboxing / Muay Thai isn't really up to what Leon Edwards is. Footwork isn't there. Bilal gets hit an awful lot as well. This is a really, really important fight for Leon Edwards, to be honest, because I feel if he goes out there and performs to the level that he can, he should be looking to go out there and finish Bilal Muhammad. And if he goes out and finishes Bilal Muhammad, it opens up a hell of a lot of avenues here. Talks of maybe Conor, Conor getting a win over Michael Chandler and coming in and maybe fighting Leon Edwards. Islam Makhachev is talking about moving up and challenging himself at the welterweight title. There's monster fights on the line here for Leon Edwards, but will the UFC want to keep putting him into these positions if he's not going out there and fighting excitingly? And that might be a little bit unfair to say. He's went a real long road to get to where he's got to and deserves to be where he's at. But, UFC does lean a lot on fighters being entertaining and rewarding fighters that are entertaining. So, I'm glad Bilal Muhammad is getting this opportunity. He absolutely deserves this opportunity, but I think this is an opportunity where Leon Edwards really has to take by the scruff of the neck and really kind of cement his status as the welterweight champion, because I don't really think he's done that truly yet, and he hasn't. Look, he's captured the imagination of the UK fans, but not generally well loved by the overall mixed martial arts audience, I don't think. And this is a good opportunity. Bilal isn't hit and miss, is kind of like Marmite with some MMA fans as well. And I think a lot of fighters or a lot of fans would enjoy Leon kind of sparking and putting him out in this fight.
Yeah, I definitely think he'd be the babyface in this one anyway. But I agree with you on the fight itself. Like if Leon wins, how's he going to win? Like, he's probably going to win like 5 rounds of maybe like a good striking display. That's like probably not going to be massively exciting. If Bilal wins, I think it's going to be like a pull Leon against the cage, drag him down, get a takedown. But like those takedowns where the opponent lands on one knee and you're holding him against the cage, and like it's, unless there's a big knockout. And the weird thing about Leon, sometimes these people kind of are remembered for certain things, right? Like, I always give the example of Brock Lesnar. When you ask someone about Brock Lesnar, one of the first things people always say is, he didn't like to take a punch. I didn't like it. But Shane Carwin fight, he took about 9 billion punches and came back and won. Whereas Leon Edwards, what you remember him for? The head kick knockout. But like most of Leon's fights aren't that exciting and are kind of like decision. Now, he's a very good fighter. Conor McGregor, he loves a decision. He said that's just fair. But like he's so good. Like and I have a lot of respect for Leon Edwards, but it's not the most entertaining way of fighting. So yeah, it could be.
He's a technical master, in my opinion. Like, so technically sound, and I do enjoy personally watching that. And this is going to be it's a kind of a puzzle that we've kind of 1/4 made already when we first seen him go in there, and I can't really see it going too much different than what we seen before the eye poke the last time that they were in there, which kind of takes a somewhat of wonder and the excitement out of the fight as well. At the same time, I think the only thing that can kind of make this fight something is that if we get a finish in it, and hopefully we do, or else it's going to be tough stations there in the
7 o'clock in the morning
Arena at 6 in the morning.
I forgot about that, guys.
Watching Bilal trying to kind of grind Leon up against the cage, and oh my goodness, it could be disaster.
It could be a long night for the Manx. Right, we will leave it there. Ian, thank you very much for joining me. If you haven't followed him yet, follow him at O'Neill MMA over on Twitter. Every Tuesday, check out the setup over in Severe MMA. Every Thursday, check out the balance breakdown every Tuesday, the setup every Thursday. I knew I was going to get it right, but no, I didn't. Every second Sunday, the Owl Triangle, covering all things Irish MMA. Check him out over on the Severe MMA Patreon as well, on the Chase and Pack, and much more. Ian, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you all next time.